Hi guys, I'm checking my camera and I wanted to have a little ball with you because I want to show you the Nitram liquid charcoal. I'm gonna try a few things and I already have tried it for a first time to see what I might be able to do with it. And I'm saying it very carefully because this is a learning curve. And I'll show you why. These are the first two that I did. And I don't know if you guys can see, this sort of like a face. And it's got an incredible amount of texture. And you can see where little streams of water flooded or flowed over the paper. So there's a lot you can do with this, but it's very, very difficult. Here is a much lighter one in which you can sort of see a little face and a lot of texture around it. And it reminded me pretty much of the Daniel Smith Lunar Black watercolor, although the particles in the Lunar Black I think are slightly finer, smaller. There were a couple of surprises because I thought that if you would use liquid charcoal and it dries up, then you would be able to erase it, and that's not the case. I worked on Canson Montval watercolor paper, so maybe that's got something to do with it, but once the charcoal is on, it will, will rub off on your hands a little bit, but the moment you start erasing it, you actually damage the paper. So it may also be the quality of the paper, but what I think it indicates is that the charcoal sinks into the paper just like watercolor would and will. So it's different. It's also when you it feels chalky when you put your hand over it, and it does, rub off. So if you want to use this in a book, in a sketchbook or a journal, you can see you do have to use fixative afterwards. But also, I have to be very honest here, because what I also did is I combined it with a charcoal pencil. This is Pitt Charcoal Medium by Faber Castell. I used that. I also tried working my the liquid charcoal with a burnisher, and I will show you that in a minute. So to make this texture, I used a little water spray, to add a little bit more drops of water here and there, so I'll show you that too. First thing I've noticed is that from these two very little experiments, I used a lot of liquid charcoal. So I'll show you the tube. It's a big box, and then there is the tube. It's 50 milliliters, but it's not going to last long. If you want to make a big painting with this, I suspect you're going to need a lot of these if you want to work with very dark tones, which is of course what makes charcoal very beautiful, is that you create these lovely deep tones, and then so it's quite, how shall I say it, this Lunar Black, I've owned this for how long? 1.5 years, and I think I still have it in pans, in boxes. So this lasts a long time. You can paint a lot with one tube. This won't, and I'll show you exactly why. Hold on, I have to get my palette. Working on a very, very tiny palette because I'm only working, this is going to be my experimentation zone, and here I want to see if I can make something. Don't know yet what. On Instagram, oh, I forgot to look up his name. I ran into an artist who works with liquid charcoal a lot, and this guy knows how to work it and does a super great job. I will look up his name and I'll insert a link below this video because I think his work is really worth checking out. but I'm doing in just small work. So I have this very small palette. This is by Etchelab. It's by Stephanie Laws, who designed it. It comes in a tin with two very little palettes. This is where you can put the paints in, and this is the mixing palette, and it's very lovely because it's very small, although some of my artist friends thought this was ridiculously small. So I'm just going to squeeze in a little bit of the charcoal, and it comes out, I want to try and show you, it comes out like toothpaste. It also looks a bit grainy. It's different than watercolor, of course, otherwise it would have been called charcoal watercolor, and it isn't. This is more like a paste, and I'm gonna also get some Lunar black in, because I think that everyone who's gonna feel interested in liquid charcoal is because they're working with water-based media, and they will probably know the Lunar black because it's quite famous. And I won't have to put in so much. This is already a lot too much. And actually Roman Schmal also has this kind of paint in his collection. It's called differently. Rembrandt has moved to creating this type of paint as well. So they're all once they saw how the new watercolor artists took off with this paint, they thought, hey, let's do the same, which I don't blame them for, and I'm glad, because we get a lot of choice these days as an artist. You no longer have to buy from Daniel Smith if you don't want to, or if you can't, because it has not been available for a long time here. But we're not talking about Daniel Smith here, we're talking about the liquid charcoal. Right, so the first thing that surprised me is that I'm gonna check if we can see everything. Yeah, you can see everything I do. I used to work with a camera that had a flip screen, so I could actually see what I was doing, and now I no longer can. So this is the charcoal. And I figured it would be darker when I bought this. It's actually more gray than it is black. So it reminds me of graphite. The only thing that it does not have in common with graphite is that when you work with graphite, there will always be this sort of sheen on it. When you twist, when you turn the paper, there will be this sheen. So this is when I dilute it with water and when I work it like paint. So when you make it good and fluid. So now I'm going to take a smaller brush. It's very small, but let's not care about the sizes here. And it's a selected filament brush, so this is not animal hair. And I try to mix the paste into a creamy soup texture to try and get it a little bit darker. And it does get nice and dark. Now I'm gonna add water and dilute it all the way down. And I don't know if you guys can see this, but here you can already see when I drop in a couple of drops of water, you can see a lot of texture happening, which is why I realized that, you know, in the watercolor pigments that are used for these highly granulating blacks must simply be carbon of, but I think the textures might be finer, you know, that paint manufacturers use. They might be finer. So what's really cool though is you can just, you know, pick up some you can actually pick up some of the, you know, contrary to erasing, you can just pick something up with a moist brush by dropping a drop of water in, and then let the hair suck up the water from the drop, just like so. And then you have this sort of like negative space in there, which can be super beautiful. Only you do have to realize, if you want to work that technique on a big surface, it's going to cost you, because this I think was about 25 euros, which will be about $28 for only 50 milliliters, and you need a lot of it for great color depth. And it is something to keep in mind, I think. I love what's happening and I love the possibilities, but I'm sort of, when I took out, I squeezed quite a bit of charcoal out already for these very small two experiments. I was a little bit in shock how much of this stuff I needed to get some color depth into it. So it really is charcoal and some agent to bind it, I think. I haven't looked it up. Is light fastness 1? So it's kind of funny. They don't say on what scale. Do they say light fastness 1 as in bad or as in good? I suppose good, because the blacks usually are good. What's in here is water, okay, we get that, gum arabic, okay, Nitram powdered charcoal, and then hydroxyethyl cellulose, talc, amino ethyl propanol, and ethyl paraben. So this, in California, this one of these chemicals is said to cause cancer. That's reassuring. So don't eat it. Don't eat it. Charcoal you can eat. If you have a little piece of charcoal, you can eat it. It's very good when you have all these parasites in your bowels, but don't eat this. Okay, so now let's compare to the Lunar Black, because that's what I think many watercolorists are viewing this channel are going to wonder about. How does it compare? So in the first place, I want to mention what you can already see here in the palette is Lunar Black is actually black. This charcoal is sort of a deeper kind of gray. It dries up quite okay, but here we go. And when you lay it down, what you can see happening is that the Lunar Black sort of takes on a bluish sheen in comparison, where the charcoal has sort of an almost reddish undertone. Okay, so that's the Lunar Black, and it looks different. You can see that, right? I mean, this is where it gets interesting, I think. This is where I think the liquid charcoal, despite what I just said about it, is actually can be an asset to your collection of art supplies. If you want to use it in watercolors, you have to realize it's crude, that the texture is like the Mars Black, no, the Lunar Black, it takes on the texture of the paper. So it is as coarse as your paper is. The charcoal, you see when I have these drops of water in there, it does something different. The particles, I think, are bigger. So what you see happening is that here you get these rivers and these deltas where the water flows over the paper. So I think in the liquid charcoal, the particles play a bigger role in determining the texture that you create than here in the Lunar Black, where the particles are much finer, so they obey to the texture of the paper. That's the feeling that I got when I was painting this. I mean, if you check this one out, I mean, this is like a river, and that's like a delta, you know, there is a big river coming out and there's a delta where the water streams into the sea. So this is like, but this is a texture you have to be looking for anything. Because this is a coarse texture. I mean, this is like the mother of all textures when you're working with watercolor, which is a kind of a delicate art supply. Then this is not delicate anymore. This is where you put in the junk. This is where it almost goes steampunk. Like, you know, it's no longer just delicate and romantic. It's just I like that. I mean, I like darkness and I like depth and I like the coarseness of it, because it can be very emotive. One thing you have to keep in mind when you use this charcoal is that if you want to use it in an art journal or in mixed media, you do need to fixate it layer after layer after layer. So, and when you do it, you can't work on top of that anymore with watercolor paint. Only if you put a layer, if you first fixate it, then put a layer of gel medium on top of that, and then a watercolor ground, a transparent watercolor ground. Keep that in mind. Another thing that's very important to realize is that when you do use mixed media and you want to work with markers on top of this, it's probably going to ruin your markers, because these particles are big and they're gonna, you know, they're gonna clog up your the tips of your markers. So personally, I would never ever do that, because that's bad. Because that's, you can feel it when you move your hand across the surface, you can feel it. You know, it comes off as well. So something to keep in mind, very important. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do, also a very little experiment I've been curious about. So I'm gonna paint a little bit of Lunar black, and then I'm gonna put in a few drops of charcoal and see what happens. Not very much happens, actually. And then we have to give it some time to dry, and I want to do vice versa as well. So here is a little piece of charcoal. I'm always looking to combine stuff and see what it does. And the thing is that with that charcoal, what I've noticed is there must be an agent in there that sort of keeps the no, that doesn't do anything. Oh, okay. It sort of gives it a jelly-like feeling slightly when you put it onto the paper. I want to get rid of these drops there. So I'm gonna do it again, only this time I'm gonna take a lot less water, paint. So this is the Lunar black. And just to see what happens. And I'm going to do it the other way around. So you can see the particles are really big in this charcoal in comparison to the Lunar black. You know, and that's not bad news, because it can actually be very nice. Sometimes that may just be what you're after. And now a little bit of the Lunar black in here to see what happens. Okay, because I can see something super beautiful going on right here. Okay, so I'm Dutch, right? So pardon my comparisons, but this is almost like a nipple. Here I put some Lunar black in the paint, and here you can see a darker area and then a lighter area around it, and then more of the roundness. It's like the paint has pushed away a little bit of the charcoal. It's quite beautiful. There is a lot of texture going on here, and I think it's a beautiful combination of the finer texture of the Lunar black, and here it's almost like roses. Can you see that? With the center, and then as if there are petals all around it. That's quite damn gorgeous. Okay, lovely. I hadn't tried that, but I was super curious. And I had also well, I want to do something, but I just don't want to ruin it. I don't want to ruin that one, so I'm gonna keep this on top. And I want to spray a little bit of water there to see what happens. Oh, nothing much. That's a disappointment. I should have waited a little bit longer until the paint had dried enough, I think. Sometimes when you spray into that, you get this kind of effect. So I'm gonna try and paint something. Have no idea what, so you know, may not be anything at all.